They say when you make a promise before the ancestors, your breath becomes part of that oath. And if you break it, your own breath turns against you. In the forgotten village of Damble, the wind still carries the sound of a woman's wailing at night. The villagers whisper her name with trembling lips. Abony, the woman who broke her vow. No one goes near her old hut anymore. It stands at the edge of the forest, beneath a massive baobab tree that hums when the wind blows, as if repeating her name. At night, people claim to see her weaving inside, though the hut burned down long ago. And when the moon is full, the village loom, once used for sacred ceremonies, moves on its own. The threads dance like snakes, twisting into symbols that no one dares read. Some say Abony was proud. Some say she was foolish. But those who heard her final cry say she wasn't either. She was simply cursed. Because Abony made a promise to the dead. And in Damble, breaking a vow to the dead is worse than killing the living. So when the wind howls through the village tonight, listen closely. If you hear the threads snapping, if you smell smoke and river water mixed with ash, know that the ancestors are reminding you. Promises do not die, even when the ones who made them do. Setup. 1,300 words. The village of Damble lay between two worlds, one of red dust and labor, the other of unseen spirits that breathed through trees and rivers. It was said that every home in Damble had two doors, one for the living and one for the ancestors. Abony, daughter of Mama Fola, grew up at that crossroads. Her mother was a revered weaver who crafted sacred cloths used in coronations and burials. Her work was not merely art, it was communication. Every thread, every color, every symbol was a message to the spirits. When Mama Fola fell ill, she called Abony to her bedside. The hut was dimly lit by a single clay lamp. "My daughter," she whispered, "this loom carries our family's voice. Promise me, you will never abandon it. Promise you will weave the cloths of remembrance, so our ancestors never fade." And Abony, with tears in her eyes, placed her palm over her mother's. "I promise." The next morning Mama Fola was gone, and Abony buried her beneath the baobab, the same tree where every weaver in her family had returned to the earth. Years passed. The village changed. Traders from the city began visiting Damble, bringing mirrors, perfumes, and silks that shimmered like fireflies. Abony's woven cloths, once admired, now seemed old. She began to feel small, trapped between her mother's shadow and the world's new brightness. Then came Kunto, a wealthy merchant from the nearby town of Boko. He saw her beauty and promised her a new life, one without dust or sweat. "Abony," he said, "come with me. You were meant for more than this village." That night, she sat before her mother's grave. The wind carried the soft sound of the loom creaking in the dark. "You said I should never leave," she whispered. "But what if my destiny lies elsewhere?" The wind did not answer, but the lamp beside her flickered, and the threads on the loom trembled as if alive. The next morning Abony left. She didn't look back. But the moment she crossed the village border, the ground beneath her feet pulsed, as though the earth itself had felt the betrayal. And that night, far behind her, the loom began to weave again on its own. Rising action, 2,000 words. In Gboko, Abony lived in a house filled with mirrors and glass, things her mother had forbidden. She wore imported dresses and perfume that masked the smell of soil. But when she looked into her reflection, she often saw threads crawling behind her, thin red strands weaving in and out of her hair. First she thought it was exhaustion, but then came the dreams. Each night she saw the loom, glowing, whispering her name. Sometimes her mother's face appeared in the threads, her mouth sewn shut. Abony woke screaming, her bedsheets tangled like ropes. Kunto grew distant. You speak to shadows, he told her. You need rest, not spirits. But the spirits did not rest. One evening, while preparing water to bathe, she noticed the reflection in her bronze mirror was smiling back, though her face was still. The reflection whispered, "You promised." Ebony dropped the mirror, shattering it. But instead of shards, the pieces turned into strands of red silk that slithered toward her feet. The air grew colder. The lamps dimmed. She fled to the market square, seeking help from a diviner, an old man with white eyes who read bones and dust. When she told him her story, he trembled. "You broke a blood vow, child. The ancestors are calling for payment." "What do they want?" she cried. He pointed to the horizon. "Go back. Mend what you broke, or they will weave your name into silence." Ebony returned to Damble at sunset. The villagers watched her with fear. The baobab tree looked darker than she remembered. Her mother's hut was covered in vines. Inside, the sacred loom stood, untouched yet still moving. Threads floated in the air like spiderwebs. On the unfinished cloth, symbols of bones and rivers glowed faintly. Ebony approached. Her trembling hands reached for the loom, but the moment her fingers touched it, a voice filled the room. "You left us." It was her mother's voice, layered, distant, echoing through the walls. Ebony fell to her knees. "I didn't mean to." "You made a promise," the voice thundered. "You turned your back on the living and the dead." The threads snapped like whips, wrapping around her wrists and neck. They burned, glowing red. Ebony screamed, but the village was silent. No one dared come near. The loom kept weaving faster and faster, until it produced a cloth soaked in her blood. And when the last thread fell silent, the loom stopped moving. But it wasn't over. That night, the villagers heard singing from the baobab grove, a song that hadn't been heard since Mama Fola's burial. It was Ebony's voice, but layered with another, soft, mournful, ancient. The next morning, the elders found the hut empty. Only the loom remained, and on it a single piece of cloth, black, red, and gold. When they lifted it, the ground beneath the baobab cracked. A chill wind blew across the village, and in the bark of the tree, a faint human shape had formed. A woman's face, eyes closed, mouth stitched shut with red thread. The elders sealed the hut, forbidding anyone to speak her name again. But the curse had already begun spreading. The village well turned murky. Children whispered in their sleep. The wind carried voices that echoed from mirrors and water bowls. It was said that Ebony's spirit had become the keeper of broken promises, bound to punish anyone who spoke falsely before the ancestors. Travelers who passed Damble claimed to see a woman by the river at night, weaving on an invisible loom. She wore a veil of red threads that moved like living veins. And if you looked too long, she looked back. Years later, Damble became a place of quiet reverence. No one made careless vows anymore. Every promise was sealed with offerings to the ancestors. A small shrine now stood by the baobab, where people left white cloths, symbols of honesty. It was said that on certain nights when the moon was full, the threads in those cloths shimmered, as though someone unseen was weaving among them, making sure no vow went forgotten. Some say Ebony was damned. Others say she was chosen, transformed into the guardian she failed to be. But the truth, perhaps, lies in what the wind still whispers. When you promise, mean it. For the ancestors are always listening. The story ends not with terror, but with remembrance. A quiet warning passed from mouth to mouth, fire to fire, heart to heart. Because in Africa, a broken promise is never buried. It breathes, it waits. And one day it comes to collect. This was the price of breaking a promise. In your life, how many promises have you made? And how many have you truly kept? Because some promises don't belong to us, they belong to the ancestors. And when we break them, they break us.